think of the word community, what do you think of? Is it the TV show? Is it a community center? Is it your group of friends? I'm sure whatever you thought of were many philosophical answers here. We at CSM believe community is important. We all have communities, and if you are here today hearing this message in CSM, we consider you part of our Central Student Ministries community. And we are so happy that you are here today. For the next few weeks, we are going to be walking through what we consider the different foundations that make up who we are at Central. So if today is your first day ever in CSM or your 100th day in CSM or somewhere in between, you belong here. You are part of our CSM family. You are part of our community. Now, this idea of community is not just something we are like making up to be a cool in church. That's not why we believe this is important. This is important because community is the heartbeat of church. The church is the community of followers of Jesus. The point of church is to worship God and be in community with one another. We pray together and study the Bible and learn from one another. We then live out being the church by serving and loving others through several different ways. Now, I know there are those of you in this room who do not consider yourselves Christians, or maybe you just have a ton of questions about God, and that is okay. That is totally okay with us. We know some of you were made to come today by your parents. Some of you slept over at a friend's house and ended up here, and we are excited and glad that you are here with us. You don't need to believe what we believe to belong. We want CSM to be a place where you ask questions, where you are honest about what's going on in your life. One time, I went to a church that had a sign that said, "No perfect people allowed." And you guys, I know it was so cheesy, but I love it. I love it because our goal for how we are growing here is never going to be about perfection. We have no expectations for you to be perfect. We would way rather you be honest and authentic. And as your pastors at Central, we are committed to being imperfect but authentic right alongside you. Because that is what makes community honest and real. It starts with you. It starts with us. Today, we are going to look at a few different passages of the Bible that talk about community. The first verses I want us to look at come from the book of John and are spoken by Jesus. Let's read here in John 15, verse 12. "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Love each other. And no, this isn't referring to like date one another, though I know a few of you were like hoping that's what Jesus meant. He means love. A love that is compassionate, a love that challenges us to be our best, a love that is rooted in community. And Jesus showed us this type of love with how he lived his life. First, Jesus was compassionate in how he loved other people. People that the world didn't see. He didn't look at people and see them as sinners. Instead, he saw them as people to be loved. He had sympathy and concern for those who were hurting and lost. The Jewish people recognized Jesus as the Messiah because of how his compassion was displayed through healing the sick, performing miracles on the blind, casting out demons, and seeing people without prejudice. In Luke 19, there's a story about Jesus passing through some crowds in Jericho, and people are looking at him, and everyone wants to see him, and it's crazy, crowded, and busy. And then there's this wee little man named Zacchaeus, and he wants to get a good look at Jesus. So he climbs up a tree to see him. And you see, Zacchaeus was a tax collector, but a very corrupt one. He cheated people out of their money, and he didn't treat others well. It would make sense if he was the kind of person that Jesus avoided. But check this out in verse 5. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." While the world could only see Zacchaeus as a sinner, Jesus saw his heart. He saw his potential. Look what happens next in this story, verse 8. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus didn't come to love only people like him. He came to love the lost and the broken, the outcasts and the misfits. Who in your life is Jesus calling for you to love with compassion? Second, Jesus challenged people with how he loved. A lot of times when we think about being challenged, we think about it in this negative way. Like, I challenge you to a duel, or I challenge you to a TikTok dance off. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's actually a thing, but I see it as, anyways, okay. But we see this word challenge as two forces competing against one another. But when Jesus challenged people, it was not to compete against them. Is to fight alongside them, for them to live their life the best way possible. Read with me here in Matthew 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child to him and placed the child among them, and he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." Jesus challenged his disciples' way of thinking about what or who is the greatest. And there are so many examples of this throughout the Bible as he helped correct unhealthy things that permeated through the Jewish culture. When we challenge one another, it's not to call us out of community with Jesus and one another, it's to call us up to Jesus. Remember how Jesus said, "Love one another as I have loved you"? Jesus pointed it out when people got it wrong, not to shame or hurt them, but to show them the better way to live. Now, I tell people this all the time. One of the things that made me fall in love with my husband, Brandon, but also totally annoys me in the moment, is that he tries to make me nicer to others. Like, I'll be super annoyed or frustrated with something happening, and I'll be at home and be like, blah, 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 blah. That person is so bad at their job, blah, blah, blah. I'm so annoyed, blah, blah, blah. I hope they get fired, blah, blah. And I'm just complaining, as one likes to do when they're annoyed, right? And Brandon is like, well, maybe that other person's struggling. Maybe you can be more patient with them, or maybe there's a way you can help them. So instead of me sitting in my place of frustration, Brandon challenges me to love people better, to be nicer. And guys, like I said, it can be so annoying in the moment because no one wants to recognize when there are flaws in their character. But also, I really love this about him. The way he challenges me and calls me up towards Jesus makes me better. Even if I'm finding it annoying in the moment, I know he's right how he challenges me to love like Jesus. We need friends and family members, a community that challenges us to love like Jesus. Our goal to challenge one another must always be driven from a place of love. It never calls us out of community to shame us, but it calls us up to Jesus and challenges us to a better way of living. Finally, Jesus was rooted in community with how he loved. On Wednesday nights for the past year and a half, we've done something we call life groups, and it is amazing. It is one of the best things we do here at Central. You typically have 1 to 3 adults that lead your group of people a similar age as you, and during groups, you process things going on in your life. And we support one another and cheer each other on through all the different things in our lives. You will be shown not just compassion, but you'll be challenged to love like Jesus. And at the heart of Wednesday nights, and really at the heart of CSM, is that we are rooted in community with how we love one another. When you read the Gospels, which are the first 4 books of the New Testament, we have all of the teachings of Jesus. Now, it would have been really easy for God to just come down and make a list of rules to follow and things to do. I mean, that's basically what he did in the Old Testament when he gave us the law. But instead, what God did as Jesus was come down and live amongst us in person, in community. You can't love and be alone. It must be done in community with others. Earlier, I read to you from John 15, and I'm going to reread those verses and continue. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. And this is my command: love each other. The final and greatest command that Jesus gives is to love each other. He said that by this, people will know we are his disciples, by how we love one another. Not by how well we pray or how often we read the Bible or how much money we tithe at church. Those are all important. But his command is to love one another. When we are driven by love for each other, how we pray looks different because it becomes less about ourselves and more about others. When we are driven by love for how we read the Bible, it calls us to be more compassionate and understanding the way of life of living others live their life. When we are driven by love for one another, when we give our money, we do so from a place of generosity. When we love one another, it drives us to live out our faith and our life differently. We saw Jesus live out community rooted in love with his disciples. What would it look like if we did community well here? Like really well, where people knew one another's names, where you could come into these rooms and be accepted and not judged, where you didn't need to ever be perfect, where you could be honest about what life looks like outside of these walls. What if we loved one another like Jesus loved? You see, when Jesus challenged his disciples to love like him, he set a pretty high standard. Because after Jesus said those words, the next day he would be betrayed by one of his friends. And then he'd been beaten and whipped and then die on a cross to carry our sin and shame and make us right with God. That's a love greater than anything we could imagine. And that's why Jesus gave us a discipline that we practice when we gather at church. It's called communion or the Last Supper. You see, at the same table where he challenged his disciples to love, he took a loaf of bread and he broke it and he said, "This is my body broken for you. Take and eat." So the disciples took the bread that was broken and ate. In the same way then, Jesus took the cup and he said, "This is my blood shed for you. Take and drink." And the disciples took the cup and drank in remembrance of Jesus. You see, Jesus had a table that night when he spoke those words, and at the table around him were a bunch of imperfect people learning to love. We had Thomas that would doubt Jesus, Peter who would deny him, and Judas who would betray him. Communion shows us how Jesus was compassionate and how he loved. It shows us his challenge to live our lives like him and is done in community with one another. And we are all challenged to love like Jesus. Each one of you is invited to the same table. And it's not your friends inviting you, it's Jesus inviting you to the table. A table where you will never have to sit alone, where there will always be room because Jesus is always willing to make a bigger table. At the end of the day, communion is about how we celebrate our community. At this time, someone on your campus will come forward and will continue in community together. Thanks, CSM.